Good morning. Creativity is my passion indeed, for many, many years. I remember when I was a kid asking to my father, where do ideas come from? I still don't have the answer, but still my work. And I'm privileged because when I was 42, you're too young. This is called midlife crisis. See, it's when you ask yourself, so what's next? And I decided to turn this passion into a job. And that's why I'm here today, so it's a good decision. So, how should I start? Thinking out of the box. I remember 15 years ago, I was giving a speech, and there was a question time, and the CEO of the company raised his hand and said, Monsieur, it was interesting what you said, but you never explained us what is this box we should go out of. And this question was important to me because I slowly start to talk about creativity on a different mode. You know, I'm with Boston Consulting Group, and we have a huge department called knowledge management. I'm in charge of ignorance management. How do we manage what we don't know? Which is a good definition of creativity. So, how do we manage what we don't know? And that's why I don't have any slides, because I don't know how to use PowerPoint, but it doesn't matter, because creativity brings back us here to really what we are for. What is a human being? A human being is somebody who can think. And because of this question about the box, I started to change my way to talk about creativity. I don't have so much time, so I'll just give you my main, not a conclusion, but conviction today. In this expression, creative thinking, the key word is not creative. The key word is thinking. And surprise to me, because I was convinced creativity was the issue. No. Thinking is the issue. And if we understand better how thinking is working, it's full profit for creativity. So I have another 28 minutes. I'm going to split in two pieces. 14 minutes, I won't talk about creativity. I'll bring you back to the thinking process. And then, in the second step, then, and only then, we're going to move to creativity. Okay? What is thinking? Let's start with a question, and I want you to participate to this. So, tell me, for example, how many colors in a rainbow? Tell me. 7. You said 7. I will ask you, are you completely satisfied with your answer? You're not, huh? But you had the courage to answer. Of course you're not. Why are you not 100% pleased with this answer? Because there are an infinity of colors. But we all tend to say 7. This is strange, because the question is simple, and you have two possible answers, 7 and an infinity. And the difference is huge. So, yeah, an infinity minus 7 is still a lot. So how is it possible to have such a big difference between two answers to the same question? I'll come to the answer soon, but before a second question, you know Greece, of course you know Greece. You know this Athens, and there is a hill called the Acropolis, and on the Acropolis there is a temple, the Parthenon, you know? You know the Parthenon? Okay. How many columns on the front wall? You just told me you know the Parthenon, so I have an additional question. So, how many columns? Now, on the front wall, guess. 7? Yeah, this is a cognitive bias, because you connect things not connected before. But how many columns? 12? 12? Well, the answer is 8, and we don't care. We don't care, but we need to remember, we said we know and we don't know. In French, we say connaître et reconnaître. We don't connaître le Parthénon, we recognize the Parthénon. We know enough of the Parthénon not to confuse with something else. Okay, so this was the beginning. What's the problem? Very simple. We don't have here what's out there. You have the rainbow, and you keep 7 colors. You have the Parthénon, and you keep like a fuzzy image. A fuzzy enough. Oh, this is a problem because it's all we have to think. And when we think, we use what we have here. And what we have here is not what is out there. And this is a problem. Because we don't have the real material. A philosopher was asked, "Hey, monsieur, what do you think about Canadians?" And he answered, "I'm sorry, I don't know all of them." Okay, maybe you say, better no philosopher in this room, but in the end, it's the only answer. No, how can you think about Canadians if you don't know all of them? But you think about them. And we already made a point. We need to simplify the world in order to change the world. Good thing. You go to 7 from 1,000,000 colors. And this is true everywhere. Imagine, let's take a simple example. When a father or a mother tells somebody, "I'm thinking about my children," this is true. When the CEO of a large company with 1,000,000 clients tells a journalist, "I'm thinking about my clients," this is not true. It is impossible. How do you want to think about 1,000,000 people? It's impossible. But I don't tell you he doesn't do anything. But what should he do or she do in order to think about the clients? He has to do the rainbow syndrome. He has to put the clients into boxes, into segments, into categories, into clusters, and then and only then he can think about the client. But the market segmentation is not the market. It's a simplification of the world. So we already made a point. To think, we have a definition of thinking. To think is mostly about simplifying the world and using the simplifications. Let's go back to the market segmentation. Part of the thinking is to look at 1,000,000 clients, to forget, and you have 7 categories. And when you have the 7, then you can go back to the market and, for example, advertise on different modes according to the categories. You see this? 2 types of thinking. When you think, either you simplify the world or you use the simplifications. That's it. Okay, so you feel 2 different types, but one is much more difficult than the other. Why? The second type of thinking is, quote, easy. Using simplifications, let's first give you some synonyms for simplification. When you talk about models, stereotypes, patterns, paradigm, theory, framework, mindset, all simplifications. And using those is not too difficult. You're okay. I don't tell you it's easy, but probably this type of thinking is going to go on computers soon. But let's go back to the first one. How do we simplify the world? That's a big thing. How do you move from 1,000,000 colors, an infinity of colors, to 7? And why 7 and not 8? And why do 7s? You have 1,000,000 clients. You build 7 categories. Why do 7? Why not 8? Etc., etc. And they're much more difficult. This is another type of thinking. If you want to think, you have to simplify. There was a novel for José Luis Borges. It's called Funeste ou la mémoire, or Memory. It's the story of a cowboy. And the cowboy one day has an accident. Boom. Falls on his head. Starting this day, he doesn't forget anything anymore. Infinite memory. He goes on a journey, comes back, meets a friend. And the friend says, "Hey, Funès, you're back. How was your trip?" Funès doesn't answer. So the friend gets nervous. "Hey, how was your trip?" And Funès doesn't answer. Why? Because he can't answer. He remembers everything. Everything. Everybody he met, everything he ate, everything he saw. Even he cannot think. If you want to think, you need to forget. To forget is the first step of thinking. If you want to think about your clients, you have to forget a lot about those clients. Otherwise, you can't. You need to take distance to simplify. If you have been to a movie recently, if you can today give a judgment about the movie, it is because you forgot 99% of the movie, at least. And 2 points. First, you don't control what's happening. When you look at the movie, you don't say, "Okay, I don't care, this is interesting." So, no. This is not the way you look at a movie. But when you go out, you forgot 99.999. And the third thing is, if you go with a friend to the movie, the same movie, you won't forget the same thing. Because it's like a connection between you and the movie. If you have a passion for guitar, and if during the movie there is a piece of guitar, you will remember. If you don't care about music, you will forget. So you see how difficult it is. You're difficult. So I finish in 19 minutes. When I finish, you will have forgotten 99.99%. But that's the rule of the game, so not a surprise anymore. So I made a first point. Are you with me with this? And I summarize, to think is mostly about simplifying the world and using the simplification. Now, some key definitions. The second type is called deduction. You deduce from the model what you should do. The first piece of thinking, the most difficult, is induction. Induction is the process where you simplify the world, when you move to the 7 colors. Deduction is quite logic. If you concentrate, okay, you can deduce. Induction is the world of magic. It will never be 100% on computer, because a perfect induction would take an infinity amount of time. Now, I can summarize in one sentence. It's not rational to be 100% rational. I repeat. It's not rational to be 100% rational. Why? Let's take an example. Your next vacation. You tell your friends, okay, next vacation, I'll have a fully 100% rational decision. You never go on vacation. Because you need all possible trips. It's impossible, even for a computer. You cannot. So one day you say, okay, I go to Greece. Okay, and this is not rational. You say, it's not rational to be 100% rational. CEO don't like this sentence, but it's the way it happens. It happens. So we'll have a very little exercise now, just to be sure we're connected. I'll have 2 short sentences. Okay, very short, unfinished, and I will ask you to finish rapidly, really rapidly, the sentence, okay? Sentence number 1. An example of a car is BMW. You see, it went very fast. Sentence number 2. Same, and I will ask you to react as fast as you did. The car is an example of mobility, freedom. The car is an example of let your mind fly. Pardon? Of speed. An example of progress. The car is an example of a big problem in the near future. A car is an example of something I like to draw. A car is an example of a word of 3 letters. etc., etc. Now compare the two sentences and compare the way you reacted. Sentence number 1. An example of a car is BMW. You can have, say, Renault, a Peugeot, or Ferrari. In the end, little happens. And little happened because you're not a prisoner, but you are trapped in a simplification. The starting point of this thinking was the idea in your mind, what is a car? You deduce, okay, and you go back to the world, Ferrari, Renault, BMW, Audi, etc. Now let's move to the second sentence. The car is an example of. What did I do? I put you in the induction mode. I force you to the concept. And that's what happened. But look what happened. The first concept I got from you, I believe, was mobility. Of course, transportation. This is called comfort zone. Comfort zone is when you induce on a traditional way. It is when you react the way you always reacted. In deduction, you have little freedom. An example of a car is Airbus. No, Airbus is an airplane. I'm sorry. So, because in deduction, you can make mistakes, but you can correct the mistakes. In the induction mode, you cannot make mistakes. She said the car is an example of speed. Somebody else said the car is an example of progress, of freedom, of nobody's right, nobody's wrong. You just simplify the world on a different mode. You are forced to the concept, and that's what you did. When you say the car, when you tell the car is an example of transportation, of mobility, it's fine. You're not right, you're not wrong. This is your way. But you have to admit this is the comfort zone. Nobody was surprised in the room. When she said an example of progress, you say, hey, progress, have you seen traffic jam? They are. And the discussion begins. You have a lot of freedom when you induce, when you simplify the world. And of course, this allows me to go and to move to the second part. What is the box? What is the box? It's a simplification. It's a simplification. And I have another 30 minutes to talk about creativity. What is, in the end, creativity? It's a way of thinking. Then it should have a room somewhere in what I just described about the thinking process. Let's start with a fact. Not a surprise. At least a paradox. You can learn a lot about creativity if you look, for example, at Apple. How did they do to produce the iPod, iTunes system? Fine. You will learn more about creativity if you understand how Sony succeeded in not inventing the iPod. It's a bit a sad story, but you're too young. 30 years ago, Sony provided and manufactured something called the Walkman. It was the iPod 30 years ago. Hey, how did they miss the iPod? The idea was there. That's the point. A brainstorm wouldn't have changed anything at Sony. The idea was there. So what was the problem? The problem was, I'm going to tell about, because I have to answer this question. And I'm surprised. I was, a couple of years ago, back from the States in an airplane, and there was somebody nearby me, from MasterCard. And so we start to discuss, what you do, consultant, innovation. Oh, good. And you, MasterCard? Oh, there's a discussion. And then he said to me, it's too bad we didn't launch PayPal ourselves. So I said, yes, this is really too bad. And then, just as if it was not enough, he added, and you know what, monsieur? We had a project exactly like PayPal. Then I said, then it's even more sad. Yeah, you laugh, they don't. Look at internet, the top 50, Google, eBay, Amazon, the whole thing. None of them is born in a large corporation. Can you realize that? Despite billions in R&D, in the, not the old business, but the, I don't know how to call this, the traditional business. How is it happened? It's a very sad story, but to me, the reason is a misunderstanding about creativity. What was missing at Sony? Not the idea. What was missing at MasterCard? Not the idea. Of course, Walmart had the idea of e-commerce and etc., and Christie's has the idea of the auction, so they all have the idea. What was missing? The box itself. And now I move to the real heart of this presentation, because it's a completely new way to look at creativity. The starting point is not to get a new idea. The starting point is, it exists, but I don't see it. It's exactly... So, how did it happen? Maybe I'll give you the answer immediately. Two things about boxes. First, and you already have a feeling of where I want to go, boxes are not in the world, they are here. You build the boxes. If you're in a bank, for example, to think out of the box doesn't mean to think out of the bank. It means to think out of the way you used to simplify the bank for a long period of time. That's the first thing. And the second one, let's imagine you know boxes are here. You know there are simplification. Even then, there is another thing. You realize the real challenge is not to get out of the current box. The real challenge is to enter the new box. And now you have a definition. A box is a simplification of the world. Because you cannot think without simplifications. And of course, this is a big thing. And let's have... I don't have much time, but let's take an example of, well, for men, the Gillette. You know the razors Gillette? When they have a drop in sales, they add a blade. So. This is fine, but it's not what I call creativity. They just use the same simplification, we raise people, and they add something. And this is fine. This is called innovation. Innovation is when you take more out of the same simplification. You go to Starbucks, you have cappuccino, frappuccino, double-chino, chug. This is innovation, and I don't judge. But probably more of the same. This is innovation, not my topic. But it becomes a topic. Why? Because one day you reach the end of something. You reach the end of something. And then you have to probably enter in creativity. And creativity is, now, two definitions. Innovation is to make more out of the same simplification. Creativity is to change the simplification. That's what's missing at Sony and at MasterCard and all the examples I gave. To change the way they looked at their business. That's it. Let's take an example. Philips. If I tell you Philips, what comes in your mind immediately? Coffee machine, light bulbs, TV, and probably things like that. Fine. This is true. This is true. But if they were only in those areas, bankrupt for a long time, with Samsung and others. If today Philips is still there, it's because there was something big 20 years ago in terms of simplifications. What you said belonged to the same simplification, home appliances. And within this home appliance box, they did use maybe hundreds of products. Neon lights and all this coffee and DVDs and CDs. Perfect. But of course, they need a new one. And it happened 20 years ago. Today, at Philips, at least last year, 2/3 of the profit and 1/3 of the sale belong not to the home appliance, belong to a new box decided 20 years ago, health. But maybe you're not aware of this. And because probably it's not there yet, but that was something big. It's incredible what happened. They decided, they looked at themselves. Suddenly they realized, hey, we can become a major actor in health. Today, 1/3 of the sale, 2/3 of the profit last year. Let's take a microwave oven and an incubator for premature babies. Very similar. Maybe you're a bit shocked and I hear some noise. Philips produces, manufactures, and sells incubators today. It's not a coincidence. You have a shock. But now, let's go back to the definition of thinking. On the world side, the object side, the two objects are very similar. Same size, steel, electricity, electronics. So, of course, you have to tune a little bit, but very similar. The problem is the distance in your mind between the two simplifications. You put probably the microwave oven in a box, I don't know, kitchen of home appliance, and of course the incubator you put far away in another box, not that nice, with problems with babies, etc. So very, very different. But that was key for success. Because, of course, to manufacture two objects, the distance is very close, and they do it in Eindhoven, in Holland. They do it. The distance was here. Health was not an idea for Philips. It was a new box. A new box, in other words, a new way to look at the business as a second step, as a reward. Then and only then you receive hundreds of ideas. And now today they have more than 100 products in health, like heart control and blood pressure and I don't know, even scanner and IRM, resonance magnetic, all those things. So, but of course it's not too difficult if you accept the new box, health, which is not a product. And then you can deduce a new wave of innovation, and it happened, and probably it saved Philips. So this was the story. Thinking out of the box remains true. Fine. But we need to understand exactly what is a box. And then we have 2 points. We know boxes are here, and we know that we cannot think without boxes. So the challenge is not anymore to think out of a bit, but much more. Which is the new box? It was health for Philips, and I can give you many, many more examples, but it wouldn't add. That was the point. We need new boxes, and that is what was missing at Sony, at MasterCard, at Auchan, at all those companies. They didn't change the way they looked at the world. So they couldn't see ideals in the world because, a priori, the box was missing. What should we conclude out of this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My field is ignorance, so I don't know how to conclude. I don't know anything, so we cannot conclude. It's just, my job is not what you should think, is how we think. My job is not to bring you food. My job is to make you hungry. That's it. I cannot conclude, and you shouldn't conclude, but I have to stop. So let's have a last story about Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. But look at his story. Before Edison, for thousands of years, the box was, if you want light, you have to have a fire. You have to burn something. And then they did use light bulb, no, the alcohol and wax and all those things. He changed the box. He told his friends, hey, no, I have a new box. I will produce light by preventing something from burning. That's what happened. Imagine the friends. Thomas, why don't you go early home today? Because you must be exhausted. So, but he did it, and because of this new box, light without fire, he could deduce, and still today we deduce, I don't know how many products. Edison was convinced two things are important when you want to be creative. First one is the joy of thinking. The second, never stop thinking, never stop. And to wrap up, a last story about him. He was giving a speech at the end of his life. He lived very old, 84, you imagine? He lived very old, and he was giving speeches, and I don't know, in Boston somewhere, he had a speech in front of an audience like you, and there was a question time. And a woman raised her hand and said, Monsieur Edison, incredible, 1,000 invention, how's possible? Still today in the Guinness Book of Records, today. So the woman said to Edison, Monsieur Edison, I have two questions. Which is your very first invention? He said, oh la la, I remember, a long time ago. I was in a village. The neighbor had a nice girl, daughter. So I fixed something in the lamp of the father, and I had the permission to go out with her. Whew. The woman said, hey, I have another question, a second question. Which is your very last invention, Monsieur Edison? Then he looked at the woman and said, my very last invention, this is the story I just told you. Thank you very much. Merci.